our sessions over here. Here's what we're going to try to do this afternoon. As Chris said, we're going to just try to make this a bit of a conversation. We had a pre-meeting to discuss how we were going to do it, and we decided that with the exception of Quentin at the end of our presentation, we're not going to have PowerPoints, we're not going to have slides. It's basically going to be a living room conversation. So once we get started, if you have questions, if you have comments, put them in the chat. Let me see that you want to say something, and I'll be happy to facilitate that. What we're going to do first is to just do a real quick round of introductions of the panelists. We thought that that was important for everybody to know right up front sort of who all of us are. My name is Doug Siglin. I've been an environmental activist in the district for more than 20 years, mostly in the water sector. I've become very interested in climate change, and particularly advocacy for new policies for climate change. And my old friend Mike Tidwell, who you'll hear from in a minute, asked me if I'd help him out with DC stuff in the District of Columbia, which I'm very happy to do. Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Doug, and thanks, Chris, for organizing all this. And it's great to see so many friends on the call. I'm Mike Tidwell, founder and director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network. We will be celebrating our 20th birthday next year. Hard to believe. I met Chris, I think, in 2004 when we together worked to pass the original DC clean electricity standard, and we passed so many bills since then. And it's we're a regional group that advocates for clean energy solutions to global warming in Maryland, Virginia, DC, West Virginia. Now we have an organizer in West Virginia, and we work on Capitol Hill. And congratulations to everyone who worked on the Build Back Better Act that passed the House this morning, so on to the Senate. So I'll hand it off to Quentin.
Thank you, Mike. Glad to be here. My name is Quinn Scott. I am the Federal Policy Coordinator for Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I've been at the organization for nearly a year now. I'm from Chicago, and for the last 10 years, I have, in one form or another, worked in government and policy. And this is, working on climate for the last 18 months has been the passion that has been most rewarding. And so it's really exciting to see the Build Back Better Act pass today. And we got some more work to do, but we're down the final stretch and ready to pass something very historic. And I'm going to pass it to Tim.
Thank you, Quentin. My name is Tim Oberleiton. I'm a senior attorney with Earthjustice, working on the Right to Zero campaign. Before I joined Earthjustice, I was at the Office of People's Counsel here in DC for a few years. And before that, I was at the Attorney General's office in New Jersey, where I'm from, representing the Board of Public Utilities at FERC and representing board staff in contested proceedings there. Again, so happy to be here. It's been a great week put together by Chris and the DC Environmental Network, and I'm very happy to be joining Mike and Quentin to discuss some of the things Earthjustice has been working on in the DMV.
Great, thanks very much, everybody. So I just have, I guess, two real brief comments to start. One is, as you all know, the Conference of Parties ended this week, and we've all seen various analyses of whether it was a success, whether it was a failure. Seems to objectively been somewhere in between. People have their own half full, half empty take on it all. But the thing that really struck me was that there is a level where this has to play out at the international conference table. And that's what we were watching. But there's another important level where it all plays out here. It plays out in DC, in Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and localities and states all around the country. And I think a lot of attention is being given to adaptation right now. I sat in on a really good session this morning with the Anacostia Park and Community Collaborative. Most of that was about adaptation. I think this conversation is going to be about mitigation. It's going to be about policy. It's going to be about advocacy. It's going to be about the kinds of things that we still can do to move up the time frame, as Chris says. We've got a lot of work to do, and there's still a lot of advocacy. We're fortunate, those of us that work in DC or live in DC. DC's a leader, has been a leader for the last several years in this stuff, but there's still a long way to go. And there's a lot of work to do. And so today's conversation is really going to be about what's going on in Maryland, what's going on in Virginia, what's going on in the district, what's going on at the federal level to try to move up the time frame, do more advocacy, and reduce greenhouse gases even further. So with that framing comment, I just want to turn it over to Mike, who's going to take as much time as he needs to tell us what's going on in Maryland and Virginia, and possibly West Virginia. Mike, take it, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Doug. And I will say, you know, Maryland, Virginia, DC, it's a pretty big region. In fact, it's about 14.1 million people live in that region. Anybody know how many people live in New England, all of New England? 14.1 million. So when you think of it that way, you know, we're as big as New England in terms of population. We also occupy and surround the nation's capital. So a lot of our wins in policy victories in DC, Virginia, and Maryland are played out under the watchful eye of national and international policy elites. So we kind of get a twofer by occupying and surrounding the nation's capital. So Virginia, you know, Virginia for years was kind of a laggard in the region for, I think, reasons we all understand. And then you know, I'm director of a nonpartisan organization. So when I start talking about parties, I'm just talking about political facts. Once the Democrats took over the trifecta in Richmond, that being the governor, the House, and the Senate, they proceeded to make up for 10 years of falling behind on climate in 1 year in the form of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. That bill passed in March of 2020, right before COVID shut everything down. And I tell people it's sort of like people in a developing country who just skip landlines and go straight to smartphones. That's sort of what Virginia did on clean energy. The bill is amazing. It puts Virginia on a path to 100% clean electricity. It has Virginia join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It uses half of the money from RGGI to invest in low to moderate income household weatherization. So it has a very strong justice component. 5,000 megawatts of offshore wind are deemed in the public interest, and those megawatts are coming. So an incredible bill, the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And when Virginia passed that bill, after being behind DC and Maryland on policy, it actually leapfrogged Maryland and DC, and now Virginia is at the head of the pack in terms of climate and clean energy policy. Now, of course, there was an election recently, and that trifecta got changed. We now have a Republican governor-elect who during the campaign said he wasn't sure what was causing global warming. He just didn't know. Maybe all living things on the planet are causing it. And we have a House that the majority is hostile toward and may try to repeal the Virginia Clean Economy Act. We're going to stop them. There's no way to put this clean energy genie back in a bottle. And I will say Build Back Better proportionally. It's $550 billion on climate that the House passed this morning. And proportionally, that's $14 billion for Virginia, either spent directly or indirectly in the state. That's more money than the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, basically Virginia's EPA. $14 billion is 10 times more money than that agency has spent over the last 10 years combined, just to give you some perspective. So a lot of money coming with Build Back Better. We're going to hang on to the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and I think Virginia is going to be fine. We also passed a clean cars legislation in 2021 to have Virginia adopt California's car emissions standards. So that's Virginia, past and future. I think future is going to be some defense and spending Build Back Better money. Maryland's been a leader. You know, Maryland tends to pass these clean energy laws first, then DC, and then Virginia did it all at one time in 2020. Maryland passed the first clean electricity standard in the region in 2004. Went on to pass an offshore wind bill, clean cars bill, and in 2019, a pretty dramatic increase of 50% clean electricity standard by 2030, and one of the strongest solar carve-outs in the entire country. 14.5% of our RPS in Maryland has to be solar by 2030. That's a lot of solar. But we haven't done much on transportation in Maryland. We haven't done much on buildings. And I think that's a common theme in all Virginia, DC, and Maryland, where the grid is getting greener. We give ourselves an A- on that. We're moving forward toward a green grid, but we still have cars to deal with, and we still have buildings. We need to degasify our buildings. Maryland's going to be looking at a bill in 2022 that would expand our greenhouse gas reduction mandatory economy-wide to 60% by 2030 below 2005 levels. Very ambitious and in line with the science. It would also mandate state bus and state vehicle fleets be electric. The most important thing, though, in my mind, is that it would require that all new buildings in Maryland starting in 2024 be fully electrified. And that's the next wave of the climate movement. Electrify everything. Green the grid, then use that green grid to power everything. Space heating through power, through heat pumps, hot water heating through electricity, everything. And I think Maryland's going to show some leadership on that. So that's sort of where we've been and where we're going in Maryland and Virginia. And Doug, you were going to talk about DC. What's next in DC? Is that right? Or at least describe that a little bit. You're muted.
I think what I'm going to do, Mike, is let Tim say what he wants to do about DC, and then we'll fill in. We've got plenty of time.
Great.
Anything you can tell us about West Virginia while you're at it?
West Virginia, we CCAN hired our first organizer there to organize in large part to put pressure on a certain U.S. senator from that state. We've been welcomed enthusiastically by our friends in West Virginia. CCAN we've been active in West Virginia fighting pipelines coming from West Virginia into Maryland and Virginia. So we had an email list there. We've been in court in Virginia, and the panhandle of West Virginia is in the Bay watershed, even though we're not a Bay group. Chesapeake is just our regional designation. But West Virginia is a logical place for us to be active. So we're growing a network. Quentin has played a big role in working with West Virginia groups. And I think we've been successful in putting pressure on Joe Manchin to support the strongest possible Build Back Better version in the Senate.
Mike, do you think the political environment in Maryland this year is going to be favorable to getting some of these big new things passed in the legislature during the session?
I do think so. In fact, the next likely comptroller in Maryland, Brooke Learman, just called me as we were talking because she wants to support a divestment bill. We're going to hopefully divest, like DC has done, from all fossil fuel investments from the state pension fund in 2022. Every Democratic candidate for governor in Maryland right now, that the primary will be in June, the general elections in next November. They all have very robust climate platforms, including divestment, including moving faster to 100% clean electricity, some of them degasifying buildings. So I think there's a lot of ambition coming from gubernatorial candidates, and I think there's some pent up ambition in the House and Senate because 2020 killed all the climate bills. COVID killed all the climate bills in 2020. In 2021, we passed some smaller bills, but a unfortunate feud between some committee chairs stopped the very big bill, the Climate Solutions Now Act, from passing in 2021. So I think 2022 is going to be a catch-up year of higher ambition, post-Scotland, governor candidates putting pressure on it. I think we're going to see some big things.
Great, thank you. That sounds great. Tim, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Again, Tim Oberleiton with Earthjustice. And I might mention before, I work particularly on the Right to Zero campaign. And just so you know, if everyone doesn't know on the call, Earthjustice, we are a national nonprofit, public interest environmental law organization. We have 14 regional offices, one here in the Washington area, covers the DMV and national issues. And we are kind of unique as a law organization that we really try and leverage the law to advance clean energy, preserving natural places, and combating climate change. And we partner with a lot of other organizations, including CCAN and Sierra Club, NRDC, and also community level clients representing them directly in various courts and before public service commissions where a lot of this stuff is getting done. And I just want to take a second to talk specifically about the Right to Zero campaign, because it's particularly important for the work we're doing in the DMV, because it's an effort within Earthjustice to target advocacy at achieving zero emissions. And that doesn't only include national work, but it also is particular in state and regional contexts. And we do this by kind of really channeling our involvement to joining existing coalitions, trying to garner galvanized support of current environmental stakeholders doing this work. And then when we need to represent those clients directly in kind of the three main areas, because we see that the emissions problem is really a three-part problem. You know, we need to address clean and renewable energy generation, which is then going to help us power decarbonized and efficient buildings and a zero emissions transportation sector. So kind of taking on advocacy in those three arenas, we started this kind of approach out in California, recently brought it over to the DMV, and also continuing a lot of the work we've already been doing, but continuing that work by advocating before decision makers. So going for the council, delegates in Virginia and Maryland, increasingly more in Virginia, and a lot of the executive agencies here like the DOEs. It also entails a lot of stakeholder advocacy and litigation for, like I said, the public service commissions, where a lot of these utility proposals, a lot of the requirements to meet these climate goals it's where the rubber is really going to meet the road on requiring to do that. And also litigating in state and federal courts. You know, when we take on clients, we have a particular bend towards representing disproportionately affected environmental justice communities, and that really bear the brunt of bad policies and some of the worst climate harms. So a lot of our advocacy tries to channel some of the benefits that come with climate mitigation policies towards those communities first, and addressing a lot of catch up that needs to be done for those people. Now, some of the big ideas I think have been covered a lot over this week, and you know, we've heard them from Mike, and CCAN and other groups have been focusing on them. And one of the big ways to address the emissions problem is support electrifying everything, all end uses powered by clean renewable energy. And that is not just an ambitious goal, it is a completely feasible one. Technology's here, it's efficient, it's getting better every day. And as it's been noted, the grid to power that is getting cleaner and cleaner. You know, natural gas companies, not only at the national level, but right here in DC, have been sounding the alarm that electrification is going to be prohibitively expensive. And we're hearing a lot of skepticism at the ability to have the load and capacity to meet onboarding a lot of end uses for electrification. Now, we heard back this past August that PEPCO in their electrification study, which was filed in a public service docket 1167, the study specifically found that future growth in PEPCO's distribution system is going to remain well within the rate of system growth that PEPCO's dealt with for the past 70 years. PEPCO's said in that report that it managed annual peak demand growth well in excess of 2%, and its estimates, which are conservative, say that the demand growth will actually be an annual of 1.4 increase between 2021 and 2050. So that's way below what they've managed over the past 70 years. And it can even be mitigated, and that doesn't account for projected energy efficiency and load flexibility measures, which is going to drop that from 1.4 to 0.9% between that same period. And the big kicker on this is we talk about electrifying end uses like heat and appliances. PEPCO doesn't anticipate an immediate need for investments to address moving towards this winter peaking system, which I can get into, but those familiar, the idea is that the electric grid is peaking in the summer because of a lot of the end uses that use electricity, but it's going to be moving to winter when we electrify home heating. PEPCO anticipates in the near future, it's not going to require a lot of additional cost and investment, and that the curve getting to there is going to be addressed by additional gradual capacity as it meets load. So this is a good story, you know, and really kind of undercuts a lot of what we're hearing from the gas industry, particularly Washington Gas here in DC. Now, another thing that I think a lot of people in this call are going to agree with, and the Right to Zero campaign focuses on, is that we're against continued fossil gas use categorically, and we're against a lot of the proffered fossil gas alternatives, RNG and hydrogen, as it's produced today. I know gas has been pushing a lot of these as the silver bullets for addressing how they're going to contribute to the various jurisdictions' climate reduction goals. but they still contribute greenhouse gas emissions, and they result in negative health outcomes for resulting from combustion, and they really are pie in the sky. You know, as it relates to hydrogen, you know, Earthjustice recently produced a hydrogen report, which really tried to take a critical look on this proffered solution put forward by the gas industry. And what I'll do real quick is I'm going to pop that in the chat for people to take a look at as I'm talking, or perhaps to look at it in more depth if they haven't read it already. And while Earthjustice is not categorically against hydrogen as a solution, it just, again, isn't the silver bullet that the gas companies are saying it is. Today, hydrogen for power and for end use is untested, unsafe, and continues to emit GHG and toxic emissions. You know, just a little bit on the science, which I'll admit I'm not fully familiar with, but the predominant method right now for producing hydrogen is a highly polluting process called steam methane reformation, which uses fossil gas and dirty power generation to generate isolated hydrogen for these uses. Now, in order to make this a viable solution in the tailored areas in which it should be used, it needs to be produced using renewable clean energy, which it can be, but that has yet to be fully scaled and developed. And it should be limited for uses where electrification really is not feasible. And there's some guideposts that we have in the report that talk about the conditions that we see working for that, but I'll let you read that in the report. The main point is electrification is possible today. The appliances are efficient and they're increasingly cost competitive. We need to strengthen incentives for retrofitting homes in order to get these appliances for low and moderate income users and make sure that they're rolled out as quickly as possible. Now, kind of a lot of the work that we've been doing in the DMV, you know, it's interesting because I think there's a lot of work that we do in DC, and I could talk about that a little bit more, but because of how close it's the Washington metropolitan area around Maryland and Virginia, how close a lot of these issues are, there's a couple of things that have been touched upon earlier in the week that are patently regional issues, such as the WMATA. The panel on Tuesday was great talking about building and transportation electrification. Earthjustice has been working with that coalition, which has been talking about pushing WMATA to have a better goal on rolling out BEBs. Now, WMATA has been very slow, and it did issue that climate commitment in June, but and that was the product of a lot of great advocacy from the EV Bus Coalition that Earthjustice had been involved in, but was the product of a lot of people coming before that and local community groups like the Northern Bus Barn Neighbors. Now, as you heard on Tuesday, despite the commitment from WMATA, their plans to buy 100 zero-emission buses a year effectively is too slow. And the best they're going to get to in order to meet their 2030 goal is only going to be about 30% of the fleet. When, say, in DC, they're aggressively having public fleet transformation happening at a much faster rate. As we heard earlier, there's going to be legislation in Maryland to require, hopefully, that all the public fleets are transitioned to electric much quicker than that. So we're seeing a regional player that can be really moved by regional advocacy. It's moving too slow. Now, another issue that we've been focusing on is Washington Gas that operates in both DC and Maryland. And one of the things, just kind of teeing off in the vein of this conversation, was regional advocacy look like, what do regional issues look like? And there should be a concerted approach between advocates on this company operating across the jurisdiction, so there's no divide and conquer. You know, I speak specifically about some of the pipeline replacement programs in Maryland at Stride and DC it's Project Pipes, which quite frankly is bad investments. We need to move away from kind of spending all this additional money on the gas infrastructure system when electrification is possible and when all the writing is on the wall that this system will be obsolete as we move towards 2050. Mike was talking about some of the goals that Virginia recently passed. In DC, we have 100% RPS and GHG emissions cut by 50% in 2032, and a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050 from the Omnibus Act that Chris had mentioned. It just is not feasibly possible that this infrastructure should still be in place and gas end uses should still be being used if this goal is really going to be met. You know, and it's also kind of important to look at what Project Pipes has been doing. Over the past 5 years, various parties have pointed out that the investments of millions of dollars into this system were not abating any of the leaks at all. it's not just tethering the district ratepayers to using gas for longer, it's also continuing to subject them to methane leaks that are rapidly popping up all over the city. So that's a big issue area that we've been focusing on. Earthjustice, representing the Sierra Club, has been focusing on also 1167, which is analyzing Washington Gas's climate business plan. Which this came out of the merger between AltaGas and Washington Gas a couple of years ago, where they made a commitment to come up with a transition plan in light of the district's coming goals. At the time, the Omnibus Act hadn't been passed, but a lot of these executive actions by the mayor and a lot of work being done by DOE and at the national level was showing that gas companies needed to really needed to change the way they did business and fundamentally rethink how they would existentially exist as they move forward. Now, we got a pretty bare bones plan from Washington Gas as commitment. And even before the docket was open, parties saw from the face of this business plan that WGL was incorrectly stating that RNG was zero emitting. It's not. By that I mean renewable natural gas. And as another proffered silver bullet to reduce gas companies' contribution to emissions, the supply doesn't really exist for renewable natural gas. It doesn't look like it's going to exist in a tangible, scaled way to meet the claims that are put in that plan. And even by their own estimates, it's going to remain relatively more expensive than natural gas and electricity as go on. So I can get into this stuff more if there's questions on them, but just the last kind of word on the future of the region is kind of we see it. There's lots of momentum, and like Mike said, the genie's out of the bottle on a lot of these commitments, but I think there's some key areas where we need to start continuing to press the district, Maryland and Virginia to deepen and accelerate these climate commitments through further legislative action, and through advocacy from stakeholders pushing the council and the legislatures to do better and put harder targets on these things. And another very key area is coordination with existing local advocates and on the front lines, traditional advocates like the Maryland and DC OPC, who now in their mandates have to consider and advocate for pushing utilities to think about climate commitments when they set just and reasonable rates. And even the commission in DC is also now required to be looking at this, but also deepening relationships and moving forward with advocacy with frontline communities who are seeing the worst of these effects in DC and in the region. So I'm open to questions. That's kind of what I would say about what's going on in DC and what Earthjustice has been working on.
So Tim, you alluded to this near the end of your really detailed and good thoughts, but can you point to specific things in DC or in the region that those listening in today could participate in as advocates? What are the issues that we really need to push on right now, and what can people do?
Sure. I think about a lot of, again, the WMATA issue, the biggest public transit authority in the region. I think a lot of reports have focused that electrifying public transport as big toxic diesel emitters, that's low-hanging fruit. Pushing WMATA to be more transparent about their data. They often have board meetings and accept public comment, but really kind of joining in the coalition and getting on the various jurisdictions who oversee WMATA to get their legislators to put requirements and really hit WMATA where it hurts, which is getting them where the money comes from. I think Talabdin Ukta from the Northern Bus Barn neighbors alluded to that on Tuesday. But I think that is a key issue to be focusing on is transportation electrification. I think another one also is to be really paying attention to where a lot of this stuff is getting done, which is again in the Public Service Commission arena, which is always open to public comment. And a lot of kind of what I do and what a lot of the other advocates do is distill the technical information in those dockets and the claims that the gas companies are making and really kind of lay them bare for being as ridiculous as they are, as how a lot of these proffered fossil gas alternatives aren't going to work. But those proceedings are open to public comment. I think what has been really working out is coalition work like the WMATA EV Bus Coalition. And there's opportunities to partner there and really get the voice heard. I think also it would be incumbent on everyone to get together and tell the council that if, say, in DC, the Public Service Commission isn't holding Washington Gas accountable, to really get some solid requirements from the council on the Public Service Commission to say perhaps do an actual gas planning docket where it's going to have tangible results for winding down the gas system in light of the climate goals.
Okay, good. So I've got a question from Stella that I'm going to read, and Tim, maybe you could comment on this, or anybody else could jump in too. I don't know the answer, but perhaps someone here does. Stella says, given the fragility of the system, do you think we should be building redundancy into it? Green redundancy that'll comprise both regional and hyper-local infrastructure? Somebody want to comment on infrastructure redundancy? Or is that beyond our scope here? Can't do it. I guess we're sorry.
No, I guess I'm kind of wondering about the question a little bit in terms of what kind of exactly green redundancy are we talking about? You know, because I think a lot of criticism that goes into the idea of electrifying everything and being fully leveraged on electrification is that you have one source of power, and then you're talking about, you know, having a lot of off-grid DERs. You're talking about having some lingering gas. I think it hasn't been talked about a whole heck of a lot before at least the DC Public Service Commission. The technology is evolving on this, obviously, but also like storage. Really trying to get better at storage and making sure that that is supplying and helping the electric distribution system with some redundancy. But maybe I answer in there, but I think my question is exactly what the actual scope of the question is.
Hey, can I just point out as we go forward, invite folks to get on and engage if they have the question. If you see a question in the chat, and like Stella or you know, but try to get them to, if they don't have to, but so we can be more of conversational. I don't want this to be like an agency stakeholders meeting where we're not, you know, we're just reporting out. I want back and forth if possible.
Okay.
That's all.
Thanks. Laura, I see you. You got your hand up. You've got a comment. Go for it.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Lovison. I'm the Energy Committee Chair for the DC Sierra Club, and I'm really excited to hear about how much alignment we have in terms of DC policy and where we need to go next, from CCAN, from Earthjustice. Certainly helps when we share that vision on climate mitigation, i.e. I'm referring to the electrification of buildings and vehicles and winding down the use of natural gas, which we prefer not to call natural at Sierra Club, but usually call methane. I want to emphasize that part of our focus at the Sierra Club is in terms of electrification and winding down methane is that we need to put affordable homes, affordable housing, low-income housing first and foremost in that effort, so that folks who have the most financial pressure and the most challenges aren't left paying those higher amounts as we transition off gas, those higher fees, and also because getting fossil fuels out of their homes will improve people's health greatly. And I wanted to note that with the Sierra Club have been starting to work with the Washington Interfaith Network and are really excited about that collaboration. Doug, you asked the group how people could get involved. So I want to be very specific about that. For folks who don't already have a way to be involved, we welcome you to the Sierra Club Energy Committee. We meet once a month on the third Tuesday, currently by Zoom. We welcome citizens of DC and the DMV if it interests you. Don't actually have to live in DC. We have subgroups focused on beyond gas, on electrification, and on energy efficiency, since that is also an extremely important part of how we electrify, is also using our electricity much more efficiently. And I also wanted to flag the DC Climate Coalition, which is kind of a lingering remnant of the very impressive campaign that passed the 2018 Clean Energy DC Omnibus Amendment Act. I would say it's maybe more of an information exchange venue at this point, but we do have a listserv, which anyone's welcome to join, whether as an individual or a group. And if you're not already on that Clean Energy DC listserv, I think that's a really good way to connect folks who are working in DC on climate and clean energy issues. I can add you. I think I saw Max. I think Max has editing privileges for that Google group, and Matthias just put in the chat. We're meeting at this point bi-monthly. Matthias is leading the next meeting, which will be December 6th, so that typically the first Monday. So really specific opportunities there for people to plug in, join in. Also wanted to say a couple things about the Public Service Commission, following on Tim's comments. Of course, one of the really important things is to get public service commissioners who will have some kind of a vision and some kind of experience, hopefully a lot of vision and a lot of experience relevant to where we need to go on climate mitigation and climate resilience. And our mayor has been falling short on those nominations. We've been having some battles with her through the council, some success recently, which I don't want to talk too long, so I won't go into that, but folks may know that our current PSC chair, Willie Phillips, was just confirmed to serve on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So there is an opening, and there will probably be another pitched battle over who fills that seat. So definitely keep your eye on that, and be prepared to be in touch with your council members about it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Laura. Feel free to jump back in a minute. In the meantime, I've got a hand up from Josefina.
Yes, thank you. I'm a citizen from Virginia. I work on climate issues globally, and being interested on locally what is happening and what not. You know, this conference came right on time for me to plug in on, you know, what is going on, and, you know, very excited on, you know, all the initiatives and all the work that is being done, and the idea of the environmental justice, looking on the disenfranchised, how they are going to benefit and affected by this is absolutely great. I have sort of a question relating to the other areas of climate change that are as relevant to electricity, obviously, and energy, and, you know, the key elements that have been talked about: transportation, building, electrification, and whatnot. But what about sort of this a specific environmental dimension that has to do with the planting the trees in the area, protecting all of these areas that really are proving to significantly support and facilitate, you know, the movement towards, you know, a climate mitigation and control issues. Another point, it is about the waste of the management of the solid waste. Yes, you know, the landfills produce methane like there is no tomorrow. Yes, and so I think that as part of the climate dimension, these aspects are also in parallel with all the work that is being done, and I'm curious to know what initiatives, what work is being done, and what elements also in consideration to tackle climate change from different areas. Thank you.
Good, thank you. So as I understand it, we've got a couple of questions in there. One is what's being done with trees and perhaps biodiversity as a mitigating factor, and the other is what's being done with waste.
Correct, Doc, exactly.
Somebody want to take it? Chris, you know a lot about waste. You want to do the waste stuff?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I was responding to questions. They want to know what big waste efforts that relate to climate, or I'm sorry, go ahead. Give me it.
Yeah, particularly landfill, she mentioned.
The initiatives and the work that is being done in that area, not what landfills generate, we know that, but it is the initiatives to really master and to handle the methane that comes from these places, and composting and bio gas, and, you know,
Absolutely.
all that are available on that. So I'm just curious to learn about that in this region.
Well, the district has one of the worst waste diversions in the region, continues to have one of the worst diversion in the region for a number of reasons. But you know, we've been working to try to reform the Department of Public Works, which has not had proper leadership meaning someone who was really committed to zero waste principles and such. Mike Ewald from the Clean Energy Justice Network is doing some really good work in trying to help move the district away from burning their waste by Covanta it's a big polluting waste facility, and there are carbon impacts from that. DCEN is going to be moving forward with a campaign to ban plastic bottle use in government, but also to follow New York's lead and ban the use of plastic bottles in our hotels in the district, and that may have some impacts. I'll put my email in the chat, and if Josefina, if you want to contact me, I'll tie you into our zero waste community. The Sierra Club has a wonderful zero waste committee that focuses on that issue, and we work very closely with them on that. And we're also trying to figure out more specifically what we can do with how we manage our waste that will reduce carbon emissions, and it's like a 2% on the district's in terms of emissions. And there's supposed to be a report that they did at one point to kind of recommend what we might do to eliminate those 2% of emissions that come from how we manage our waste. But anyway, I'll leave my email and you can contact me and I'll hook you into the zero waste community.
Great, thank you.
Here's what I'd like to do. Mike, if you could take about 30 seconds or 45 seconds, tell us what you know about landfill gas or landfill methane in the region quickly. And then I've got a hand from Jamie. And then I want to get on to Quentin and talk about federal stuff.
Yeah, let's get to Quentin as soon as we can. Landfill methane is a real problem. It's a 10 times bigger problem than we knew. In Maryland, there was a new study using new technology, and they found that it dwarfs all other sources of methane is landfill. And so we've got to get on it. We need to cap these existing landfills, and we make sure that going forward, we reduce the amount of waste going into landfills that create methane, especially food matter, and we need to compost more. And these are problems throughout the region that we need to address.
Thank you. Jamie, comment or a question, and then let's get on to federal stuff.
Sure, thanks, Doug, and I'll be brief. Jamie Donovan, I'm with the Department of Energy and Environment in DC. I manage the implementation of Clean Energy DC, which includes the plan and the act. So thank you to all of those folks on the phone that were instrumental in getting the act passed. I have you to thank for my job, perhaps. And also thanks, Chris, for putting together all these events in 1 week. I organize events. It's not easy, so doing it all in 1 week is quite a challenge. But these events have been useful for us to hear from our residents and stakeholders on what's important. We're at DOE seeking the answers, and we have good leadership and we're encouraged to do so, but we don't have all the answers. So hearing what's important to you guys is actually really important to us. And that's particularly true. We're going to start updating our Clean Energy DC plan and looking at new policies soon. That plans on a 5-year cycle. So we're really listening to what you're saying and happy to engage individually or otherwise. If you have suggestions, and also just note that, the district got infrastructure funding, and, how we spend that, is some of it will go to existing programs. We don't know where some of it will go, but I think, it's a good time for the advocate community to perhaps make suggestions and work with our different leaders here in DC to try to help steer some of that money to make sure it goes towards programs you want to. But I've already talked too much. I just really want to say these events have been very nice and informative, and thanks for putting them on.
I agree. Thank you, Jamie. So that's a nice transition over to Quentin to talk about what's going on at the federal level. And Quentin, as we talked about, perhaps a note in there someplace about what kind of extra resources the district might be able to expect, either through infrastructure or through the BBBA, and how life might change because of the federal legislation. So Quentin, over to you.
Yeah, today is a really exciting day. Actually, This panel was very well timed. Today, the House passed the Build Back Better Act with all but one Democrat voting for it. What I thought was most interesting is 9 Republicans didn't even show up to the chamber to vote for it because they know it's a really good bill and didn't want to be on the record voting against it. So we took a really big step forward into funding a lot of the local projects and state projects that were mentioned with previous speakers and comments. And so, like I said, today is a really exciting day, and we're really to like the final hurdle to making sure that we're providing a lot of resources to deepen and accelerate a lot of these climate solutions. But let's take a step back real quick. On March 31st, President Biden introduced the American Jobs Plan. And coming out of that became 2 vehicles that are going to have an impact on infrastructure and climate. And the first is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or more commonly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework. And then the other, as passed today, is the Build Back Better Act. And so the bipartisan infrastructure bill was key to unlocking the $550 billion in climate investments in the Build Back Better Act, because moderate senators like Senator Manchin and Sinema and Warner from Virginia wanted there to be some bipartisan element of the infrastructure bill. So by negotiating the bipartisan bill and getting 19 Republicans signed on, we were able to then move forward with a climate-focused Build Back Better Act. And just to note, there are some really good things in the bipartisan bill, and I'm going to share my screen here so we can get a sort of a scope of what we're talking here. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
All right. So let me try and switch. There we go. All right. So this is the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. As you can see, it doesn't really cover a lot of key sectors, but it does have some elements that we really like. It's really focused on airports and seaports and rail, roads, and bridges. Only reduces carbon emissions by 1%. It does provide $68 billion for remediation and including money to close orphan wells and abandoned mines, $65 billion for updating the electric grid, which is going to add reliability and resiliency, and actually very important to create new connection points so we can add the necessary renewable energy to the grid that allow us to do fully electrification across multiple sectors. $7.5 billion for electric vehicle recharging stations, and then $2.5 billion for electric school buses. These investments alone would be historic, but it doesn't quite meet the scale of the problem. So to remind everyone, Biden committed to reducing carbon emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. And so the Build Back Better Act is the part of the American Jobs Plan that is going to get us on the pathway to hit that goal. And 49% of the investments are directly targeted at the electricity sector, which accounts for 1/3 of all carbon emissions. So moving to the next slide, you can see how the Build Back Better Act covers so many different sectors. Some of the numbers have been changed in the final version, but this gives a really good indication of what industries and sectors you can see it impacting, and a rough amount about which how much is invested in each one of those sectors. So sort of zooming in a little bit, we have $320 billion for clean energy tax incentives. Included in that is rebates for electric vehicles. If you buy an electric vehicle made by a US company, you'll get a bigger rebate. And if you buy an electric vehicle that's made in the US and a US made battery, you get an even bigger rebate. And it's all tied to union standards, which is really key and important that President Biden promised when he unveiled his plan back in March. In terms of buildings that Mike and Tim brought up for Maryland and Virginia, the plan has $135 billion overall for buildings, with $65 billion of that directed at affordable and public housing. for energy efficiency and other retrofits that'll help lower electric bills. There's $15 billion for the Civilian Climate Corps, which I believe that was Laura, that one of the guests on here brought up about planting trees and sort of land remediation. So the Civilian Climate Corps is going to be focused on a lot of those sort of efforts. And the great thing about it is the program is going to hire people right there in their community. So in rural West Virginia, where there's a high unemployment because a lot of coal mines closed up, they'll be rehired to engage in cleaning up those coal mines and and improving the environment in those areas. And then there's another $5 billion for environmental and climate justice block grants. And then throughout the bill, there's money dedicated for disadvantaged communities and low-income communities that'll address air quality, clean water, job training for maintenance of electric vehicles. And there's even money set aside for data collection and research to make sure all of these programs and provisions are actually being equitable. And so they're going to be evaluating these programs yearly to make sure that the money is going precisely where they want it to go. So this is just a slide that really just shows you the difference between the Build Back Better Act, which is on the left, and then the bipartisan infrastructure bill, on the right. And so you see why it's so important that the Build Back Better Act pass, because that is where we're going to see the most climate impact from that bill. And so this final sort of like slide here is to really show where, how are we getting to that 45%? So you see the biggest chunk says the Clean Energy Payments Program. Unfortunately, that's not included anymore, but the clean energy tax incentives are. But the money that was removed from the payment program actually got shifted to the clean energy tax incentives to beef it up. And so that's going to have a huge impact on making that 45% goal of reducing climate emissions by 2030. And then you see the electric vehicle incentives. And then the third biggest section is the methane fee. That's going to deal with cleaning up landfills and natural gas drilling for natural gas and fracking. So the methane fee is probably the thing that's still under attack by industries and corporations. And this is one of those places where the advocacy community can still get in and make sure that we're protecting the methane fee, because everything else in the bill is basically carrots and making sure that we encourage with tax incentives. The methane fee is the only stick and penalty that if you don't comply and move in a more positive direction on climate, that there's an actual penalty. So, if anybody wants to get involved in, fighting and defending the methane fee, I can share my email and, connect you to some of that work. And so you kind of see all the other smaller impacts, but it all adds up to 45%. But if you remember, I said Biden committed to 50 to 52%. So that last 5 to 7% is really going to come down to states. So this is where we go back to that state advocacy that's going to be really important. So hopefully when this federal money comes down to the state levels, it'll actually encourage states to add a little bit more on top of it so they can actually help meet these goals. So that's going to be really important. Also included are direct payments for solar panels that individual families can access. If you live in a red state, there's special carve-outs that allow municipalities and county level government, as well as school districts, to access some of these grant programs. So if your governor isn't on board with some of these investments, there's a workaround so you don't have to exclusively rely on your governor. Some people question if this bill goes far enough. And I just want to remind everybody, in 2009, the Recovery Act that President Obama signed into law provided $90 billion for clean energy. And in 2012, the Republicans criticized him for those investments because some of those solar companies did go under initially, but those crucial investments actually stabilized the economy, or that industry over the next decade. And so right now, solar energy is the cheapest form of energy. And so this bill is 6 times greater than that bill. So imagine where we'll be in another 10 years. So we took a really important first step to passing, or next step, and we have one more hurdle left for the Build Back Better Act. And we're going to see fantastic funding coming down from the federal government to encourage state and local governments to do more and to help accelerate some of the things that we know are necessary.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks for your work on it. You did a great job. Chris, what's up?
Well, I just want to add just kind of the caveat here. The next big thing in Maryland, Virginia, and DC is to protect that money. We've already, the American Recovery Act money that Biden sent to the district, the council rated $22 million from Solar for All programs, weatherization, and building energy performance standards. And with the promise of, well, that one of the next bills down the road, we're gonna we'll put that money back, but we can't let that happen anymore. Our stuff is completely underfunded, and $20 million doesn't sound like a big deal to a state government like Maryland or Virginia, but it's really important to DC, a small city like DC. And so I know Doug and Mike were talking about, ramping up budget protection for environmental programs for new, old, and existing environmental programs. But that's a big thing looking forward, is getting a real sense of where this money is coming from and protecting it.
So Quentin, do you have any sense that you can give us about how money will flow to the district from the legislation? I mean, I'm sure that there's a variety of ways here, but how do we see it move toward DC?
Yeah, this is done through the process of budget reconciliation. It's not the most ideal way to govern. So they're just creating buckets of money that'll go to individual departments, as similar to how the Recovery Act worked earlier this year. So that's why there's a lot of opportunity for advocacy groups to influence how the money is distributed out, and how that money flows and where to go. But some of the things that I took a note of that could potentially impact for DC is it's projected that over the next decade, DC will need another $1.75 billion to upgrade its water infrastructure. And so, there's money to make sure that the president made sure there was enough money in the overall spending that as DC needs to access these programs, there'll be enough money set aside. Right now, there's currently 1,000 DC residents working in manufacturing, and through tax credits like 45C, which focuses on clean energy manufacturing, that could triple the amount of folks employed in manufacturing, as well as residents will have the opportunity to access programs like the Weatherization Assistance Program, as well as the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator, which are already in existence and being operated by local governments, but it'll just add even more money so more families and communities are impacted. So these are some of the ways that we'll see DC impacted by just flushing these departments with more and more money. And it's going to be key to the folks on this call and others to make sure that they're reaching out to local officials to make sure that that money is going exactly where it was intended to go.
Great answer, thank you. I think Jennifer's got a real specific, interesting question here. Quentin, are there incentives for geothermal in the bill that you know?
Yes, so there are renewable energy tax credits, so that'll go to wind, solar, geothermal, and batteries exclusively.
Great, thank you. Do we have further questions or discussion here about the federal stuff? Let me take just a moment. I want to mention a couple of things about the district for those that I hope are going to want to be advocates. Laura teed up one of them, which is that the PSC chairman has stepped down now to take a role on FERC, and it's going to be important to find a good person to
So
be
if we
on
can,
the,
at least if you can,
PSC.
at least.
Josefina, could you mute yourself, please? So that's probably going to happen fairly quickly. The good news on that is that it's going to happen in a way that's controlled by emergency legislation that the council passed a couple of weeks ago, or last month's meeting, I guess it was, that at least requires that person to have some background in grid modernization and environmental policy, which is the first time that I know of in the history of the district where we've actually had some qualifications for a PSC commissioner, and that's good news. We don't know at this point, I think, who the mayor is going to nominate. I think it's an opportunity for some advocacy to try to find a way to encourage her to nominate somebody so that we could get out ahead of the fight. But if she nominates somebody that's not going to be good for the green community, as Laura said, it's probably going to be a confirmation fight. That's one thing to note. Another thing to note is that there are two important pieces of energy legislation pending before the council, both introduced by Council Member Che and other members of the council. One was introduced back in May called the Climate Commitment Act, which really would lock into statute, into law, the district's energy commitments. And secondly is the Clean Energy DC Building Code Amendment Act, which would lock in progress on buildings, which are, with transportation, the two big sectors of the energy use in DC. Both of those need a hearing. CCAN has asked, and Sierra Club, and I'm sure others have asked Council Member Che to schedule a hearing on those bills at her earliest opportunity. But it's something that I think we're going to be pushing on quickly, and going to be encouraging people to help us with the advocacy on those two pieces of legislation. Floor is open. Oops.
I think I would just echo along the lines of getting good people on the PSC advocacy that has really good tangible effects, is getting decision makers in place that are thinking about these issues in the right way and going about them and making the kind of votes on the respective boards or bodies they're in. You know, I'll just, another plug for the WMATA issue in DC. We have two relatively new board members, Lucinda Babers, who's deputy mayor in DC, and Dr. Tracy Haddon-Lowe from Brookings that have recently been installed for DC's representatives to the board that are very promising, but also two representatives from the federal government that were replacing holdovers from the Trump administration and that were installed by Secretary of Transportation at the time, Elaine Chao. So, and again, two promising people to be looking at these issues. So, you know, to the extent that is an effort that, going back to the question of what areas can you get involved in, it's, you know, linking up, joining coalitions with folks who are interested in having the right people in the decision-making table in the right places. So, and we're seeing already successes.
Good comment, thank you. So,
Hey, Doug, can I throw something in on the Public Service Commission?
certainly.
This is Laura again. And I just want to say, since there are a lot of people on this call who know people, that if you know anyone who would be great for the job of DC Public Service Commissioner, encourage them to apply, with the caveat and the full knowledge that it may not be a very fair evaluation process, because it hasn't been in the past. So to go into it, give it their best shot, but realize that that there are some forces at work in the mayor's office that don't always favor the most qualified candidates. But unless qualified people apply, we certainly won't get qualified nominees. So huge plea for people, you know, there is a DC residency requirement. How long is it, folks? 2 years, 3 years? That's
I don't know, Laura.
yeah. So anyway, there is a DC residency requirement. And if folks, if someone on this call applies, or you know someone great who applies, please please let us know at the Sierra Club so we can help, so we can be aware and help boost their candidacy if we can.
I want to mention that Laura Levison was one of our climate warriors at a recent meeting we had with the mayor. It was DC Environmental Network, the Sierra Club, and what was the other group? DC Climate Action. And with the mayor, it was just a meeting with the three of us, four of us maybe, and the mayor. And Laura was our lion in that, really made the case. And we didn't get much out of that, but we were told by others within the executive that when the mayor left the room abruptly at one point, the tension that was in the air was good tension, the kind of tension we need to create to move our stuff forward. And so I just want to say Laura has been a real leader on that and has worked closely with DCEN when we were pushing to make sure these qualification bills made it through the council.
Thank you, Chris. Mark Rodefer and I are the partners in crime on this at Sierra Club. So get in touch with us if you know of great people who apply. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Laura, just something that's been on my mind about that is there any play to reach out to WRI or some of the other groups in the city that have experts that aren't necessarily engaged in the advocacy community to see whether there could be candidates there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we should do. So we should probably regroup and come up with a list and do some outreach.
Okay, cool. Any other comments from anyone?
After 5 days of this, I'm empty. I got nothing.
Yeah, good. Well, let's just gavel it down then. Going once, going twice.
Chris, thanks for organizing this, Chris Weiss. Thank you.
Yes, thanks to everyone for participating, the 300 plus people that participated in this.
Yeah, let's give a round to Chris, huh? Good job.
Great panels, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you,
got
everybody.
lots of work to do. See you at the December 3rd at 2 p.m. meeting with decision makers to explain to them what we talked about.
Okay, thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris.